So this is, I think, things happen in threes. I think this is our third interview.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a little while though.
It's been a little while. Yeah, yeah. So it's great to see you. I don't know that we've actually seen each other. And I think that's one of the beauties of
Mhm.
living through this pandemic is that now Zoom's kind of the way, and it's so great to see everybody. So thank you so much for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
So we're on the 5 year anniversary of this pandemic. Ultimately, when you look back and you think about the new project, live shows, what you're doing, how much of living through that as a musician, and you're a creative, you do all kinds of things, you know, you're a journalist and you have all this stuff going on. How much of living through that has sharpened your spear or the way that you do things now in this modern era of 2025?
That's a great question. I hadn't thought about it. I actually kind of totally forgot. It really is like the 5th anniversary.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's March now.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I guess with this particular project, it seems like something I would have gotten into during the pandemic because it's heavily computer based and, recording and editing related. But I actually didn't really do very much of that during the pandemic. I guess there was actually a little bit. The very initial seeds of some of the stuff that I do on this album, I kind of stumbled into during the pandemic, like things where I was stacking like multiple takes of Charlie Parker playing on the same tune just for fun, for myself to listen to.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are some tracks here where I'm doing similar things and layering. But yeah, I think just having that period of a lot of contemplation, composition kind of helped me think about creative ways forward as a composer and an improviser that I'm still working out, have been working out basically in the 5 years since.
So how does that work for you when you go into an album? Like you said here, you were experimenting with Bird and you come up with this idea. When you go into, say, with this new album, do you have this vision that you're going in with, or is it truly improv? You have this urge, you have things that you're thinking about, and it just kind of organically, evolves into this creature. How do you do that?
Yeah, this project, Lo-Fi Lowlands, is really different from anything I've done before because it really is emergent from the editing process. So, in other words, we played 6 sets live over 3 weeks at this bar where I've had residency for a couple of years now, coming out of the pandemic, and I basically had the intention of not releasing it the way that it happened. That was kind of one of the creative constraints I put on myself is I want everything to happen in a different order than how it happened live, just to see because I've never done anything like that. So why not? We could always release it edited. I mean, we could release it just mixed as a live record, and that's fine. I've just done that so many times where I wanted to push myself to try something new. And a good friend of mine, Jacob Schulman, who's a great saxophone player and musician overall and thinker, did something similar last year, which inspired me. But his was in the studio, and I called him before I got into the editing for this project and asked him for advice, and he gave me this really, really memorable, kind of disturbing image. But basically, he said, "I think you should treat this music that you're making as, think of it as like the fungus that grows out of the corpse of the recording of your music. Think of it as something that just emerges from it, and is kind of alien, but related to it. And so that's how I treated it. So I didn't, in other words, short answer is I didn't know exactly what it would sound like. I just started trying things out. And this collection of songs is kind of just like the first pass of, things to emerge from that.
So what are you hoping the listener gets from this album?
I hope that it transports them into kind of like a unique sonic world, that I created essentially that exists more or less only in this collection of songs. It's kind of like the same set of instruments. It's all pulled from the improvisations on the same piece that we did, week after week, but everything's kind of scrambled and orchestrated in different ways. So there are a lot of tracks actually where I'm not present in the mix. Like the saxophone is not there, but there's a lot of drums and bass, with different levels of effects, and it kind of takes you through different interpretations of the same musical space, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So May 9 is the release date. What do you do on release days? Are they special for you? Are there things, maybe you get the box of CDs and I mean, what happens? Champagne? What, I mean, is
Oh,
there,
These days, I mean, it's changed quite a bit in the past few years. I think generally physical, unless it's vinyl, tends to be less in demand in my experience, at least, for the people who buy my music. These days, it's really about, hoping that you get some hits in terms of streaming, as far as like playlisting. That really helps with getting the music out to a bigger audience. Letting people know that it's available. In this case, for this album or this EP, I'm trying something new as well. It's aside from digital, it's cassette only. So I just bought a cassette deck so I can make tapes. It kind of goes with the aesthetic that it's quote unquote lower fidelity. It's not really, because there we did record some overdubs in this really really high end studio in New York called Sear Sound. So it's kind of tongue in cheek, but I do like the cassette format too, and because it's so short,
Yeah.
if it's nicely on the tape.
Yeah. No, that's my era. I totally remember that, being able to make mixtapes and just that whole world. It's weird that it's coming back, but that's the weird thing about the music industry is that, you know, all the ghosts of technology have been bemoaned so badly, then embraced. And then now we're going back to the vinyl and we're going back to the cassettes. And of course, CDs are still a standard issue for musicians. So it's funny how all of those have remained, even though we have such ease of access to all of this digital media.
Yeah, I think they all offer something different, each
Yeah.
medium, and it's great. And I think the more people live in like a streaming world, they realize that they miss certain aspects of these physical media. I definitely felt that way when I went back to cassette. I hadn't listened to cassette since I was a kid, and I was like, oh, this actually, yeah, this is a different experience. You have to wind it. It takes a lot of time. If you want to skip tracks, you have to really want to skip it. So,
There was a band when I was really starting to wrap my head around jazz in the late 90s. There was a band called the Malachi Papers here in Kansas City. And they used to have all of these like components around them. And one of them, I think it was either a tape deck or an 8-track deck. And as a part of their sound, they would just take that tape and they would loop it through. And it would make this
mm,
really interesting, like George Lucas kind of another planet, Star Wars sound. And it was so cool. Like even in that kind of notion, with even the way that, DJs have used turntables and all of that, it can actually become an organic part of a music process.
yeah, definitely, it's definitely you can create just with that. And it's funny, as part of the editing process, I asked some friends who are more experienced, about things that they've tried, and they showed me like all these plugins, to emulate a cassette, like tape warble, and you have all these dials that you can, do it. But then you can also do it physically. Like my friend showed me his a cassette, he has a deck, and then he can jiggle the tape while it's playing, and while he's recording it, into the computer, and then so yeah, that there are a lot of options these days.
So, I'm not a practicing musician, but obviously I love jazz and love interviewing musicians and being part of this process. And I know what that does to me, what the process does and how much it enlightens me, how I look at improv and the temporal nature of our reality in a completely different way. But you're a musician and you're doing the same things. You're interviewing musicians and you're a journalist. How much of that process of cultivating and culling through the thoughts and stories of musicians influence the way that you have approached the music over the years? How has it been an evolution or a sea change for you?
Hmm. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. I think all musicians are kind of scholars and journalists, like they're just doing research about the history because it's interesting to them, and it enriches their life and their appreciation of the art form and how they approach it. It increases the reverence and seriousness, with which they engage with the art form when they realize that so many people have sacrificed so much just to be able to make their art, the way they want to.
Yeah.
I can't, I don't know. I'm not drawing on any specific moments. It's sort of just a gradual accumulation of hearing stories, that resonate with you, that inspire you. Just watching interviews, reading interviews, oral histories, things like that. It's very, I guess, reaffirming sometimes to see, artists from earlier generations having similar experiences to you in, different historical contexts,
Yeah.
but, same sorts of dealing with the same sorts of day-to-day annoyances and grievances and things, that just come with the territory. It's just part of the life of being a musician. But they went through it, they created great art, so it means, theoretically, if you stick with it, it's not going to deter you from doing something great as well. That's how
That's
I think about it.
interesting. That answer is, especially the way that yeah, musicians are kind of students, and I notice that. And I notice a lot of musicians will tell me, "Oh yeah, I heard that interview," and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Sometimes I feel like I'm in an echo chamber, right? Like I'm not sure who's doing this. I don't really ever see specifically the hits and all of those things that happen, and it's not something that I'm honed in on. But when I hear that, it's a lot of musicians. And I think a lot of musicians want to hear what others say, and just by osmosis, it's like being on the bandstand with the veteran. Those guys don't necessarily have to say things and give you tips. You're going to see how they roll, how they operate, and you're going to soak from them what you are going to get from them.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it can be so subtle. I mean, I had this experience recently where, I was rehearsing with a band with older musicians, and there was something that was going on about, kind of like indecisiveness about how the song should be presented or, how it should start essentially. We tried some things, and then, kind of like the most experienced musician in the band just said, I think you should go with your original vision, and that was it. That's all he had to say. And immediately it just strained everything out. So
Yeah.
just, things like that, uh, that tells you everything you need to know.
You know,
Pretty amazing.
I want to kind of step back a little bit to that first question about the 5 year anniversary. I remember during that time period, you know, a lot of people, especially in New York, Brooklyn, were moving back to Midwest roots and places they could afford. No one really knew, especially students. And there was this uncertainty as to what it was going to do. Seems as though there's been a more resurgent, a more determined crop of cats that have come into this music that's only emboldened the evolution of this art form. Are you feeling now that we're all back at it? That there's a level of that? What's your bead on what's going on in the jazz community?
Yeah, my impression was essentially, I think my take on it is that the pandemic sped things up a lot because not just, you know, in the sense of like aging people mentally or anything like that, but people if they thought they were going to maybe move out of New York in 5 to 10 years, they just did it then and they didn't come back, and then that created lots of basically opportunities for younger musicians, to get gigs and get work. So when I came back, I'm sure there were many saxophone players and people who maybe they would have stayed an extra 5, 10 years without the pandemic, but they moved, to back to where they're from or wherever they wanted to sit down, plant roots, and have a family. And so I was able to get, other gigs and opportunities that way. And I think that also helped, people who are at the very like most formative stages of their careers basically get a chance to just dive in and start working. Whereas maybe it would have taken an extra 5 years or 10 years,
Yeah.
for that process to happen without the pandemic. And so that's why maybe it feels like there's a certain sudden, surge of creativity. But I think really it was just compressing a few years of time, what would have been normal time
Yeah.
into 1 year.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I want to kind of jump into the journalism side of you. Is there a dream musician or dream interview you would love to interview that you haven't done yet?
Oh man. I mean, I've been kind of out of the game for a little while in terms of the interviewing. And part of that is I felt like especially coming out of the pandemic, like I just really wanted to present myself like as a musician,
Yeah.
get more work that way. And
Yeah.
so I kind of pulled back from that because you know how it is like in the scene sometimes it's very easy to get pigeonholed and people just think, oh yeah, this guy just does this. He only writes or whatever, But I just want to play and compose, So I was kind of putting more pressure on that. I mean, I don't know. Formally, yeah, I would love to talk to any great elder musician like Sonny Rollins, just
Yeah.
as you see, you know, the greats, they're not going to be with us forever. So just an opportunity just to informally talk with any of those people is, a blessing.
Well, and I think the beauty of that, and I've interviewed Sonny before, is that there's so many stories, and you may never ever hear it in another interview. That's the beauty of this interview process. Sometimes I wonder if they're getting the same questions, the same kind of answers. And I don't think that that's happening. I think there's a lot of organic, very unique stories that are coming out that are just going to add up and stack into the history and lore of each of these musicians.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, if as long as people are willing to talk, it's always great just to get more stories.
Yeah,
There's no limit on how much lore
yeah,
could be shared. It always
sure,
is helpful to hear the stories again.
for sure. So, have you been to Kansas City? Have you played here before?
I haven't. No, I mean,
Oh,
I love to just visit, but I
yeah.
haven't gotten it together.
Okay, well, yeah, that would be great. Yeah, no, it's and Kansas City is surprisingly just always building itself up. We're going to get the World Cup here soon. Obviously, we got the football team, but we got the American Jazz Museum, and there's a lot of opportunities. It's like that's the thing about the pandemic here is that there was a lot of big cities that got hit hard. Clubs closed, and Kansas City stayed around. All the clubs stayed around. Things continued. Things continue to add on. So, I don't think I've ever asked you that, so I was curious. So that's kind of my lead in here to what's going on with promoting the album, shows, things coming up in the warm months.
Yeah, I mean, for this album, it is kind of tricky because we can't really play the music live. I mean, we could have the
Right.
same, but it's not going to be the same kind of vibe. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's not physically possible unless we had some crazy, effects and things connected, which we could maybe do at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, in the short term, I'm still promoting this other like double album from the fall. So I'm going on the road in April for about a week to the, mostly on the West Coast, and it's the band that's on this EP plus a pianist, Christian Lee. So it's Walter Smith on bass, Kayvon Gordon on drums, plus piano, and that's kind of a more, let's say, for lack of a better word, like traditional format, just quartet music,
Yeah.
improvising tunes, melodies and things like that. But I don't know. Honestly, I think I'm just gonna see how people respond to this, and I'm still editing. The next set of songs, is almost ready, and there, in my mind, there could be at least six or seven. It just depends on how much energy and time I can put into it. I feel like this first one took me a really long time because I was also just learning how to use Logic and how to edit and use different effects. So hopefully the other ones will go a little quicker. But also, if I learn something new about something I could try, then it might be the same thing over again. In which case, it could take much longer. But there's no rush. I don't think the music's gonna go bad. It's that fungus that's growing.
Absolutely. So is Bandcamp the best place to pick up a copy if they want to get and benefit you?
Yes, absolutely. Bandcamp's the best. I mean, if you order a cassette, I will record the cassette, print out the art, fold it, and mail it to you. But you can also just buy it digitally, and yeah, and
Right
it's
on.
Bandcamp private, right? So
Yeah, I will put links in the show notes. Kevin, it's great to catch up with you, see you in live living color. Best of luck with the release, and hopefully we'll catch up down the road, man.
thanks, Joe. Really appreciate it. Nice
Thank
to
you,
talk.
sir. Nice talk. Hello, friends. Joe Domino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Domino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedomino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.